Welcome. Today is the 13th day of Cheshvan, the 14th day of November, and we're continuing with the essay, the short essay, on this topic of God's omniscience and what exactly divine providence means. And we began with the question of why does it say that God had to come down, as it were, in order to see whether it was as her cried, speaking theoretically about the city of Sodom and Gomorrah before judging them to destroy them. And last time we asked a series of questions, and we said that really in the end there is such a thing as God's omniscience, which doesn't need any kind of action for him to perform in order to know everything that's going on in the world. However, there is a world, there is a reality, and as we see the reality is functioning in a disconnected way from God. We don't see God's hand openly in reality. And this has always been a subject of speculation, even given the fact that we have prophecy and we have revelation from the time of the patriarchs, from the time of Moses, a little bit further on, a few hundred years after that. But in the end, prophecy ended, and even during the time of prophecy, not everyone merited to see, as it were, the lid taken off the world, and how it actually works. So there is, for certain, another perspective on this world, and the perspective that used to be entertained in the past, which was considered the scientific perspective. It's very important to understand. It wasn't that people that were irrational thought this. This was the way that rational people with a logical mind, very similar to ours, although maybe they didn't know as much, but they certainly worked in the same way that we do. They reasoned and thought in the same ways that we do. These people came up with the explanation of angels. Now, it's very important. I'm mentioning this because the answer that the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, is going to give to this question is that this is describing reality from our point of view. From our point of view, there is such a thing as a cry that comes up and God, as it were, coming down. And we'll explain in a moment, but I just want to connect this to the idea of angels. Angels are to the mind during the time of prophecy as what particles are to the modern scientific mind. The reason that they're different is because in the time when there was prophecy, there was a direct revelation of God's presence in reality, although again, not the intricate workings of it. But people felt differently. They had a different experience of reality. They experienced reality, even inanimate reality, as being connected to moral considerations. There was always some kind of palpable experience that was causing people to go in this direction. So angels are not inanimate particles the way that we see it in modern physics. Modern physics is, or physics in general from the time of, we could say, Newton and on, is a representation of the way that mankind sees reality now that we are in a state in which divine providence is completely hidden. I don't want to say actually divine providence, I want to say the divine presence. The divine presence is completely hidden, what we call the Shekhinah. It's in such exile that we walk around the world and most people, 99.9999% of people, do not feel that the world has a moral dimension to it. They may feel that their lives should have a moral dimension, but they don't feel that the world is that way. And in the time when, time of Moses and on, during the generations and in which there was prophecy, there was a very different feel about going about in the world. There was a clear indication that to people, and this is how they interpreted it, that whatever is happening is also happening with a moral dimension. That's why for them, the messengers of forces, the messengers of God's workings were angels, which seemed to be more, again, call it, for lack of a better word, morally inclined forces. So let's get back to what he says here. And now he says, והנה כתיב, שבעה אלה עיני השם הם המשוטטים בכל הארץ, וכתיב כי השם אינם משוטטות בכל הארץ. There are two verses. One in Zechariah in chapter 4, and the other one in Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, chapter 16, verse 9. These seem to indicate that there are eyes of God traveling the earth. Obviously, God doesn't have eyes. So what is this talking about? So really what this is indicating is a state of what we call enclothement. That God is, as it were, not appearing directly, but appearing through the workings of creation, the way that he set up the world to our eyes. And the way he set up the world to our eyes is that there are forces here that are working in his name, but they're working in a way that we experience them as separate forces. And then he says, and this is the opposite of what omniscience means, because omniscience means that he doesn't have to enclothe himself. It means that he sees everything by just seeing himself. He doesn't have to enclothe himself in eyes, as it were, that are now going to travel the earth in order to bring back a report about what's going on. אך העניין כי נודע שבעשר ספירות יש אורות וכלים, כי בחינת חסד וגבורה זו בחינת כלי, אבל האור הוא הערה מאין סוף ברוך הוא. דלם בכל מידות הוא כלל, רק שהאור מתלבש בהכלי שהוא חסד וגבורה, ושאר מידות שנקראים בחינת כלים שמגבילים את האור, ובהן ועל ידן נמשך האור להיות מחיי נבראים בעלי גבול. So, in Kabbalah, this framework of forces is called the Sfirot. And the Sfirot are like conduits that take the infinite revelation of God and limit it in some way. And again, God encloses himself. He invests himself, as it were, his infinite nature into the Sfirot. And then we get a structure that a person who doesn't have prophecy, a person who can't, again, take the lid off, take the cover off the or draw the curtain aside and see how things are actually happening. How are they actually happening? It's all God. There's nothing else here. But if you can't experience it that way, then you experience through some kind of intermediate. And this intermediate are the Sfirot, or the, as we'll see in a moment, the angels. להיות התהוות מיכאל וגבריאל, מחנה מיכאל מקבלים מבחינת חסד, גבריאל מבחינת גבורה. So when God wants to distribute loving kindness or might, judgment, he does it through these Sfirot, and these Sfirot are akin, they're the parallel structures to what we also call angels. So Gabriel is the angel of judgment, and Michael, he's the angel of loving kindness. And they are, as it were, different from the Sfirot in the sense that they do move around. The Sfirot are not considered to be something that moves around. They just consider to be permanent structures within everything. But the angels are moving around, and that's what we mean by the eyes. שאי אפשר להיות המשכה זו מהאור עצמו כי אם על ידי הכלים. ושאי אפשר להיות השפעת כסף וזהב והנשמה, אלא אם כן מלובשת בגוף ונותנת הנשמה צדקה לעני על ידי היד הגשמי. And the example that the Alter Rebbe gives here is a beautiful example. I think this is one of the few places where he gives this parable. If I have a sense of loving kindness in my heart, and I want to give someone a present, well, it's not enough that I have that sense in my heart. It's not enough that I feel overflowing kindness towards someone. I have to actually use my hand, and here he takes the example of taking a gold coin and giving it to the person that I want to benefit. I need my hand. So the light, what we call here the light, is the feeling in my heart. Again, it doesn't mean that feelings in my heart are God's light. This is a parable. It's a metaphor. So what I feel as a feeling of loving kindness, of overflowing kindness, is the light, and it needs a vessel in order to act. If I don't have a vessel for it, so I can feel all the kindness I want, if I can't actually translate it into some action, then it stays in my heart. This is exactly the nature of any kind of relationship between two people. You can say you love someone, But if you're not doing anything for them, if it doesn't translate into action, there's a big question about what this love is exactly. So the same thing he says, as using this metaphor, is by the way that we perceive God's influence in the world. We perceive it as God being the light, as it were, the feeling, the pure, pristine sense of loving kindness, and the angel, in this case Michael, he's the one, or Michael as they say in English, he's the one who actually is like the hand that hands it over. But he's the hand, nobody would say thank you to my hand. And this is a famous metaphor when a postman brings you a check for $10,000 because you won something or whatever. You don't hug and kiss the postman thanking him. You hug and kiss him because you're very happy, but he's the wrong address. It's not the postman who gave you the money. The money came from somewhere else. The same thing is true here about any kind of natural action that occurs in the world, or any kind of natural explanation of things that happen in the world. And again, I want to stress this, that in ancient times, the logical scientific explanation for everything that's happening in the world was using sfirot and angels. It's still true, it's not that it's wrong, it's just that we've descended so far down, so far away from divine presence, or at least from being able to experience divine presence, that for us everything is inanimate. We don't feel the moral, psychological side of physical reality. We're not animists anymore, although some people still are, and they try to bring it back. That's what the nature of all these nature religions is. It's really trying to bring back a sense of wonder about nature, which really means that people feel that there's something missing. We miss something when we turned everything into atoms and molecules. There's got to be more to the story. So, it's an equivalent description of reality, whether I use quantum mechanics or whether I use angelology and sfirot. It's an attempt to explain how we perceive reality. And again, this is not how reality really is, because from God's perspective, reality is really just Him. There's nothing for Him to do in order to know. His omniscience is absolute and immediate. But as far as we see things, it's as if He has to send His angels to perceive the world, and these angels are called eyes. In the same way that a court would ask a messenger to go and give it a brief about how someone is behaving, what they've done, are they keeping the terms of whatever the court has decided, and so on. In that sense also, it's as if God has to send a messenger out to go and see what is happening in the world. Are things happening the way that He wants them to happen? Is somebody guilty? Has somebody been kind? And so on. So these angels, they act, as it were, like God's eyes, and they bring back a report. The place that this is most famous, this image, and again, it's an image, it's an attempt to understand how does the world function. So the image that's most well known that uses this is at the beginning of the book of Job. The beginning of the book of Job, he says that the children of God, of Elohim, they go out and they bring back a report. And God asks them, have you seen my servant Job? And that starts a lot of problems. Sometimes you don't want to be seen as a woman that Elisha, the prophet, met, and she said to him, Betoch ami anochi yoshevet, I sit within my people. I'm nothing special. It's much better to be within the public, the community, not to stand out. In any case, getting back to this. והנה כמוכן על ידי הכלים ב10 ספירות הוא גם כן מבחינת העלאת הזכות וחוב של כל נברא. כי על ידי שאדם עובר עבירה קונה לו קטגור אחד, נעשה פגם וכתם באותם, והלך הממונה על זה כי יש מלאכים שקבלים מידה זו ויש מידה זו, כנ"ל בעניין מיכאל וגבריאל וכולי. ומלאך זה מעלה הדבר למלאך גבוה ממנו עד שמתעלה בכלים ב10 ספירות המלכות האצילות המתלבשים בביאה בתוך הכלי מלובש האור מאין סוף ברוך הוא. And now that is also the source of what the sages say, that when a person does a good deed, it's as if he's created an angel, a good angel. This good angel is the same thing as saying that out of the quantum field you created some particle by doing an action. Except these actions and these angels that are created, they have moral value. they have a moral dimension to them. So when a person does a good deed, he creates a good angel. When he does a bad deed, he creates a bad angel, one that's going to prosecute him, meaning is going to give testimony that he acted so and so. Again, this is an attempt to explain how the world works from my perspective. How does God know about what's going on? From my perspective, it doesn't seem that God knows everything. He has to have some system here that's working to inform him. And that is that system. And the angels are known in general as Michael being the right side, Gabriel being the left side, and they report up the ladder until it reaches what we call the sfirot, the conduits, the divine conduits of the world of emanation, and within that is the infinite revelation of God. לכן נאמר על זה, עיניו משוטטות שהוא בחינת הכלים ד10 ספירות. וגם המלאכים, and that's why it says that his eyes, God's eyes as it were, are traveling, are scouring the world. And these are these angels that are reporting back. וגם המלאכים מקבלים מהם נקראים מראי דעיינין ויש מראי דעודנין. And it's not just eyes. He says in the Zohar we also find that there are angels that are masters of sound. They hear, as it were, that what you speak is also reported of. והם משוטטים בכל הארץ. By the way, there's a famous verse in Ecclesiastes, do not curse a king in your private chamber, because the bird of the heavens, Of Hashamayim, will make the voice travel. And that's always interpreted to be one of these angels that is dealing, that is scouring the earth, as it were, to report what is being said. And it's not being said, he's not reporting to some king, he's reporting to God. And this is also stated in the tractate of Avot, the ethics of the fathers, that a person should know what is above him. There is an eye that sees. Eye that sees is one of these, is all these different types of angels that bring the report back. And when you're talking about these angels, when you're talking about the vessels, there the language of scouring or wandering and descending, as we'll see in a moment, is relevant, because they work through what we call enclothement. They're not immediate. They're not, if you follow the morning classes here, the morning class which we call daily Chassidus, then we've been talking a lot about this. This is called, the God's direct influence on reality is called Hashra. It's called total immersion or total universality. But the way that we experience reality is through enclothement. And again, I refer you back to those classes. We've been talking about this the last few days. And we gave a lot of examples this morning, actually. ובהם ועל ידם מתעלה הדבר בחינת האור המלובש בתוכן אין סוף ברוך הוא, והוא על דרך גלוי וידוע, שידיעה זו שבכלים דרך ספירות, שעל ידי אינם משוטטים, ובחינת גלוי וידוע לאור אין סוף ברוך הוא המלובש בהכלים, כיוון שהאור באמת לה מכל לימודות הוא כלל, אף על פי שהוא מלובש בהכלי. And this is also a form of, it is known to him. It is known, it is revealed to him. Why? Because the light, the infinite revelation of God is called light. This revelation is enclosed in the highest vessels of the Sfirot, and when the report comes back, it's as if the light knows it immediately. וזהו התירוץ לקושיית הפילוסופים שאין ידיעה והשגחה זו גורם בחינת ריבוי, כי השגחה על דרך אינם משוטטות ועל ידי הכלים כנ"ל. אבל ידיעה באין סוף ברוחו המלובש בהכלים, מה שיודע ורואה מה שאינם משוטטות, הנה ידיעתו ידבר זו היא בבחינת גלוי וידוע. But, so we have here two directions. The one direction is God knowing things, and that's called galui ve'yadua. That's also called revealed and known to him. But there it's instantaneous. There is nothing that he needs to do. It is passive. It happens in and of itself. And as opposed to that, you have the directionality of the act of the angels or other forces that are reporting back, as it were, they're giving back the feedback about what's going on in reality. And that requires a process. And so, what the philosophers, he ends with saying, and again, this is a very short essay, so he doesn't get into it deeply. Right after that, there's a longer explanation, which we don't have time for. But this answers, he says, the problem that philosophers had with multiplicity. Why does this answer that problem with multiplicity? Because the whole problem with multiplicity is that you assume that it is God himself who is dividing into the myriad forces that you see. That assumption, says Kabbalah, says Chassidus, is incorrect. Does it lead to a logical explanation? No, there is a paradox at heart here. The paradox is that from God's point of view, there's no difference between reality and himself. And so reality remains unified. There's not really the multiplicity that we see from our perspective. From our perspective, there is multiplicity. But this is what we call achieved through what we call enclothement. You have to have the enclothement of the light into the vessels in order for there to be multiplicity. I want to give one example so that you understand why enclothement is so powerful. And the example is definitely one of the hardest things to have come by 200 years ago, but there were examples. I don't want to get into them right now. I want to give the example that for us makes a lot of sense. When you hold a phone in your hand and you can flip between apps. So you could say, I have many, many phones here because one app is my Google and one app is my mail and one app is my I don't know what else you use, Facebook, and another one is YouTube, and another one is this and that, and I've got hundreds of apps. So it's as if I have 100 phones in my hand, 100 different phones, because I can show you, here it is doing this, here it is doing that. Each time the whole screen changes, the whole functionality of the phone changes. But the truth is you only have one phone in your hand. The multiplicity is created through enclothement, meaning all these apps are living inside one structure, one box. And the box is one. The box is one thing also. There's only one memory, there's only one CPU, there could be more, but you get the idea. There's only one screen, there's only one button if you're using an old iPhone, or there's no buttons, or there's only one camera, whatever it is. There's only one. And each one of them is using, each one of these apps is using the phone in a different way, so it can seem to you like you have a multiplicity of applications. From God's perspective, this is what the world looks like. The world is all Him, from His perspective, and everything you see is just one or another app, or one or another human being, soul, inanimate object, which also has some kind of soul, again, especially going back to the explanation of reality that was used in 2,000, 3,000 years ago. But in the end, it's just one world. From our perspective, each one of us is autonomous, each one of us is separate. We can't even understand why in the world would you even say that there's no multiplicity. It's the same thing. If I remember when first cell phones came along, so there was somebody who was selling plans for cell phones. He says, since we have cell phones, we can make a lot more money, because it used to be that when you had plain old telephone service, POTS as it's called, you had to send a technician home and he had to play with the wires, and then the phone company could say, we did something and you owe us more money. But now that it's all cell phones, it's not connected to anything. Well, you just put it behind your back and you bring it back to the person and say, well, I changed the plan and now you owe me more. He didn't really do anything. The phone's still the same phone. They're just charging you differently at the company. So the phone remains the same, and it tolerates so many different variations. So this is, I think, a very powerful metaphor to begin. It does challenge our understanding of reality, but it shouldn't, because we're not meant to give up our perspective. We're not meant to come and say, oh, everything I see here is wrong. That's not the purpose of Judaism. It's not the purpose of Torah. The Torah wants you to have the normal human perspective where there is multiplicity, but it doesn't want you to fall into the trap of saying, because I see multiplicity, then, as the philosophers say, it's impossible that there's one God. No, God is one, and God is everything. He's omniscient, and everything is Him, and He knows everything by knowing Himself, meaning that He knows everything just by knowing who He is, which is me and you and everything else. Um, but that's his perspective. And I'm not supposed to necessarily have that perspective. I'm supposed to function in the world that I'm in right now. And in this world, to choose to do the right thing, in this world, to choose to pursue goodness and kindness, in this world, to choose to pursue God's mind, even, to try to understand this as much as I can, even though I will fall short. And there will always be a gap because his thoughts are not my thoughts. I can't perceive the world from his perspective fully. But it's still incumbent upon me to study Torah, to learn Torah, to understand these ideas, and to act within the confines and the limits of being a human being. So thank you very much for joining. It's been a little bit longer than the usual, and I hope to see you next week with Parashat Vayeira, the life of Sarah. All the best.